I really wanted to give a really nice perspective on not just diabetes and relationships, but diabetes and how you navigate relationships. When do you tell someone that you have diabetes? How do they respond? What concerns do you have? And even as the partner, what concerns does the partner potentially have? So I figured who better to bring in than Amelia, and we can talk a little bit about our experience. What would you have done if I did this? If I walked in the conversation and said, hey, Amelia, my name's Ben and I have diabetes.
I mean, I would have been like, that's a really interesting fact to lead off with. Like, hi, I'm Amelia. I have Hashimoto's. Nice to meet you.
Right. Like we're not here just like wearing our patient diagnoses sheets wherever we go. You said too, though. You're like, I knew diabetes. I thought I knew diabetes. I learned about it in school. I've seen it in the hospital. But living with you was a whole nother animal. Can you elaborate on some of these things that you didn't know, that you thought you probably knew, but you didn't actually realize?
Gosh, I feel like I could take up the whole podcast with this, but I won't. I promise.
Welcome to the Your Diabetes Insider podcast, where we take all of the mysteries of blood sugar control, focusing on nutrition, exercise, and any of the other 40 plus factors that may impact your blood sugar. If you don't know me, my name is Ben Zeal. I'm a registered dietitian, certified diabetes educator, strength and conditioning coach, and I've lived myself with type 1 diabetes for over 20 years. And I am here to share everything that I have learned in both my personal and professional experience so you can live that incredible diabetes life. So get ready and let's dive right into today's episode. What's going on? Welcome to this episode of the Your Diabetes Insider podcast, where I have my first in-person live human, but it just so happens that she's my wife.
Yeah,
hi, Amelia.
First podcast, ready to go.
So I know you're excited for your first ever podcast. I know it can seem a little bit daunting, but are you really excited? We're gonna talk about our relationship and the beat us a little bit.
Yeah, let's dive right in.
I was gonna say, so if you don't know, this is Amelia. Tell us a fun fact about yourself.
Born and raised New Yorker, lived in Florida for 8 years. And my wonderful husband is this beautiful specimen right here.
What's up? But regardless, so Amelia and I met about 4.5 years ago, which is insane. Yes, dating apps actually have the capability of working. But the reason that we are here is I really wanted to give a really nice perspective on not just diabetes and relationships, but diabetes and how you navigate relationships. When do you tell someone that you have diabetes? How do they respond? What concerns do you have? And even as the partner, what concerns does the partner potentially have? So I figured who better to bring in than Amelia, and we can talk a little bit about our experience, maybe give some advice on if you are someone in the dating market or the dating world, or maybe you have kids that might be at some point, some ways to go about navigating relationships with diabetes. So you ready to jump in on that?
Yeah, let's
ready to
get
make
right
it happen?
in.
So like I said, we met on a dating app. We met on Hinge, and that's a long story in and of itself, which we can save for another day. Needless to say, Hinge decided to say to both of us that we would be a good match for one another, and little did they know, here we are. But anyway, so we were starting to talk on Hinge, and we talked for a few weeks. And at some point during those first couple weeks, I kind of realized it might be time to mention the diabetes. But what was your thought? Like when I first initially said, I have diabetes, what was your initial reaction?
I don't think I really had a reaction. Because like working in healthcare, I'm just like, oh, okay. Like,
tell a little bit about what you do in healthcare just to provide some context.
So I guess for background information, I'm a critical care emergency medicine pharmacist. So I've been through a lot of school, been through residency. So I felt like I knew diabetes pretty well before all of that. But I don't know. It wasn't really a big deal. I don't even remember when you told me, by the way. Like I can't even place when that was. But I remember it wasn't really a big deal to me at all. So I was like, oh, cool. He has diabetes. Like, I don't really care. Like, that's not whatever.
And so the beauty of it is that Amelia had that kind of reaction. You had that type of reaction. You're thinking, hey, I know what this is. I'm a pharmacist, whatever. A lot of people have lots of concerns around, should I tell them? Should I not tell them? And I've had those thoughts myself, especially early on in dating where I thought somebody might judge me. And so you obviously didn't care, and it doesn't sound like you would have, but could you, from based on people you know or based on people you've worked with, have you ever heard of someone who was kind of adverse to the fact that someone might have diabetes or might be put off, or could you even see why somebody could be put off?
Yeah, I mean, I could totally see if you don't have a background in healthcare, you're not, maybe somebody in your family may or may not have had it. Maybe you haven't been aware of it before. I could totally see where somebody might feel that way, or they might be like, oh, what is this? But I guess those just weren't obviously my experiences because I had, the background in healthcare. But I could totally see that happening. I could see, for the person with diabetes where you would potentially like be, I don't want to say afraid to like tell somebody, but where that would be another thought on top of the 5,000 other daily thoughts that y'all have running through your mind. So I could totally see where that would be. And I guess for Ben, it's a good thing that, we met and it worked out for us, obviously. But, I could see where with somebody else that may not have that background where that could potentially be.
And in our case too, so I mentioned it before we even started dating because I frankly did not give a crap. I was kind of thinking, and I even said this to Amelia on our first date, take it as you will. I am what I am. You can like it or love it. And I literally said that on our first date. We're sitting eating burritos outside of the taco bus and locally in Tampa. But again, regardless of that, there have been times in the past where I did care a lot. And there are people that I know. There was a girl, I was actually at a diabetes conference. This was 2015. And she was seeing this guy. I think they had hung out for a few weeks. And at the conference, at some point, we were all in a group and we were walking back towards the pool area. And she just got really, really sad all of a sudden and started to bawl. And somebody said, "What's going on?" And she mentioned that the person that she was seeing didn't want to see her anymore because of her diabetes. So that is a very real thing. And at the end of the day, those aren't the kinds of people, at least from my perspective, that you want to even deal with. I'm not saying walk into a conversation and what would you have done if I did this? If I walked in the conversation and said, "Hey, Amelia, my name is Ben and I have diabetes."
I mean, I would have been like, that's a really interesting fact to lead off with. Like, "Hi, I'm Amelia. I have Hashimoto's. Nice to meet you."
Right. Like we're not here just like wearing our patient diagnoses sheets wherever we go as like the first thing you mention. And, if it's, "Hey, tell a fun fact about yourself." I don't think the first thing you're going to say is, "Oh, I have diabetes." It might be, "Hey, I, in your case, grew up in New York." Or it might be, "Hey, I'm a Minnesota Vikings fan." It probably isn't going to be, "Hey, I have diabetes." So I wouldn't necessarily advocate saying it out of the gate, but when do you think would be an appropriate time? Like, obviously, I told you a couple weeks into us talking. Do you feel like that was a good time frame? Do you feel like it would have been better for me to wait until we actually met in person in this situation?
Ooh, that's a really tough question because I feel like you obviously want somebody to know, so neither of you are wasting your time. If you're like, this person's going to be freaked out by this, like, I'd rather kind of like rip off the Band-Aid type of thing. But like, obviously it would be weird, like Ben just said, like to introduce yourself with that kind of like, what the heck. But honestly, I think going back to Hinge, I feel like now it's starting to come back to me. I feel like you had pictures with like your Dexcom and everything, so I think maybe that's why I didn't have a reaction, because maybe I like knew or something. I don't know. I think that I could see it in some of your pictures. But as far as like when you would tell somebody, I think it just depends on like how your relationship with that person's progressing, like how things are going, and I guess just like your ability to be able to talk to them. And those are all things that are part of like any relationship, whether or not there's a chronic disease state that needs to be managed. And I honestly think it's a good thing because it teaches you and gives you an opportunity to see how the other person would react to things where you would like potentially need a level of support. I mean, it's not like you're a handicapped person because you have diabetes. Like, you have a lot of other things going on and things that as a partner you want somebody to be supportive of. But in any relationship, whether you have chronic diseases or not, you're still gonna need somebody to be that rock for you when you're not having a good day or you're, kind of not at your best self. So
well, and to your point too, so I feel like there's a couple things. First thing is I feel like you totally just outed me for having a shirtless photo on my profile once upon a time, because otherwise how would you have known my Dexcom was there? But anyways, that being said, I feel like, yes, it's going to be important, and I don't think that someone needs to lead with it. And in our case, we obviously met online, but I feel like if you meet in person, again, probably wouldn't be the first thing. If you're at a dinner event or you're at an event where there's food, yeah, you might be dosing and someone might say, "Oh, what is that?" "Oh, it's my insulin pump." And I think the most important thing is just owning the absolute shit out of it. Not being like, "Oh, well, don't dance around it." Because at some point, if you like them enough and they like you enough, they are not going to give two flying Fs that you have diabetes, because they are there for you, the person. They are not there for, "Oh, this is really fun, but you have diabetes." If they're not that serious about a relationship, they're not going to be that serious to begin with, diabetes or not. But if you and that other person truly have that mutual bond, I don't think it matters. I think at some point you say it, but you just have to own it. You can't dance around it. Like, what if I danced around it? What would you have done?
Well, you haven't danced around anything because that's just not,
that's
not who you are as a person.
Yeah, that's also very valid.
But I don't know. I think it's kind of one of those things where people play off of like your emotions and how you present things to other people. And if they see and they're not like, they don't have a background right, kind of like I mentioned earlier, if they see that you're, playing it off like whatever, hey, it's just another thing that I have to do. Like some people have to wake up and take a pill in the morning. Some people have to wake up and go do this. It's just like another thing that you have to do, like when you're eating or whatever, when you're, needing to do that. So if you're like, well, I don't know, I don't want to say anything, or you're trying to like hide it, I'm sure like, kind of covering your shirt if you're on a pump to try to like not let people see that you're dosing. If you're like playing it off like that, then people would be more inclined to like think that there's an issue. But if you're kind of like, hey, that's my insulin pump, if they ask or whatever, I don't really think that they're gonna think it's a huge deal. And maybe there's different types of people in the world. Some people might think one thing, some people might think another thing, who knows. But if you don't make it a big deal, I feel like they won't make it a big deal. Kind of like case in point, it's as big of a deal as you make it.
Yes like the I am what I am, you can like it or love it. It's like, this is me, the person. If you like it, great. If you love it, even better. But you know what, quite frankly, if you don't, I just don't give a and ending it that way, because like I said, if somebody cares that much, thankfully, you didn't care. But if somebody were to have cared that much, they're not that person for you, and it's not worth wasting any of your precious time, and time's your most precious commodity. So that, that was kind of the intro, the early on part of us just getting to know each other. But obviously we hung out a few times, we hung out a few more times. Eventually I wondered if you actually liked me, and it was clear within a few weeks after that you did, but the relationship moved kind of slow. Then we became official and it was great, right? But what I will say is, over time, getting to know each other, hanging out, you seeing some of the blood sugar fluctuations, because inevitably too, doesn't matter how good your control is, there's going to be a day where you have a bad site, or you forget a dose, or something happens and your blood sugar goes to the moon. How did you respond? What were your, thoughts when it came to, oh my God, Ben's blood sugar's high or it's low? Or, did you have any instinctual thoughts or desire to, help, or just, hey, I need to leave him alone?
Wow, that's like, it's kind of hard to process. So I guess from having a background in healthcare and knowing, I was never like, I'm sure the last thing he wants is me like being like big brother, like watching over him, like having his Dexcom share up all the time. I'm sure that's the last thing he needs. Like if he wants my help, cool, he can ask me. But I feel like I've always kind of in our relationship taken a hands-off approach, except for, if something's really messed up, or I know you had like a really bad high, or you had a really bad low, whatever, something like that, happy to help. Like whenever you need me, I feel like I'm always willing to help, but I'm not like
the helicopter.
Yeah, exactly. That's
helicopter girlfriend or wife, where it's like
zooming on in.
Where it's like, hi, what's your blood sugar today? What's going on? Why is your number 107 when it was 106 5 minutes ago? Like, you don't need to be that kind of person. But no, and I feel like I've heard both ends of the spectrum, right? I've heard the helicopter people where everybody's constantly, oh my God, what's your blood sugar? You went up 20 points. What did you do? Or you went down 20 points. You're gonna, what's going on? Why are you? No. And then you have the other side where there are people I know who just don't care. And I feel like finding that happy medium, but happy medium would be the best point. But to your point as well, something that I think is really important is what you just said. You're like, hey, I don't think he wants me to be all up in his business. I think that's a discussion to have early on in the relationship. And we may have had that. I honestly don't remember. We probably did once we moved in together. But it's something I would still recommend making sure you have that explicit conversation, because what you don't want is them having one expectation, you have a totally other expectation, like any relationship with anything, right? But this is a major point of diabetes. And then saying, okay, I'm going to be a helicopter. They don't want me to have nothing to do with it, or vice versa. They want me to be involved, but I don't have any involvement and I don't know what to do, so I'm just not going to. I feel like something has to be said about that.
Yeah, I think honestly, thinking back to our relationship, I think the time when we actually talked about it the first time was when I found out that Dexcom share was actually a thing, because I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't tell you.
There were so many things, and I think that's like one of the most interesting things about dating somebody with diabetes, even having a background in healthcare. There's so much more that I know now and we're 4.5+ years in with a gazillion more to go. So like we're in it to win it. But like before, I felt like I knew diabetes really well, and then living with you, like being in a relationship with you, it's really like there's so much that I didn't know before, which is just wild to think of. But yeah, I think we initially had our conversation about it when I got on your Dexcom share.
Well, and I think too, with something like that, I think you got onto my share because I was going out of town for something and you weren't going out of town, and you wanted to make sure I was good, which again, very nice of you. Thank you. And I think it was something I was open to, because I feel like it's always good to have that second set of eyes that isn't going to drive you crazy and you're on the same page with. But that would be something, again, I'd have that conversation within the first couple months of, hey, what do you want the involvement to be? If you're the partner who doesn't have it, I'm assuming both people don't have it, right? What do you want the involvement to be? Do you want me to be on Dexcom share? Do you want me to be looking at blood sugars? Do you want me to be asking asking you stuff, or do you want me to just kind of let you do your thing and you come to me when you want help type of deal? And I think having that expectation early on is absolutely crucial to a successful relationship with diabetes.
For sure. 1,000%.
And so then I like you said too, though, you're like, I knew diabetes. I thought I knew diabetes. I learned about it in school. I've seen it in the hospital, but living with you was a whole nother animal. Can you elaborate on some of these things that you didn't know, that you thought you probably knew, but you didn't actually realize?
Gosh, I feel like I could take up the whole podcast with this, but I won't. I promise.
Give us like 2 or 3 good examples.
I was gonna say, I'll pick out a couple of my top favorite ones. I guess number 1 was watching Ben absolutely like crush a donut, crush like these crazy desserts. Like, I just never thought that that was possible. I mean, I also didn't think that, you know, our consistent carb diet had to be the life for the rest of your life. Like, definitely didn't.
And what is that consistent carb diet, so people know?
What, like 35 to 30 to 45 grams of carbs with each meal or some crazy.
Don't forget, 45 at breakfast, 60 at lunch, and 60 at dinner, 15 to 30 at snacks.
Yeah. Anyways, whatever. That crazy.
Don't do it. Please don't do it.
That crazy nonsense. I didn't think that that was how people lived, because I was like, that's just not realistic. So I'm not even going to pretend like it is. But I think just seeing Ben eat really crazy foods where I was like, you know, hey, it's really hard to guess it. Like, you can't even guess it what's in this. But seeing him go at it with like a systematic approach and how you would break this down, how you would assess what's in this so that he can do whatever he wants to do was really cool. I think another thing I learned too was, I don't think I was fully aware. I mean, we probably learned it somewhere along the lines in school, but I don't think I was fully aware how emotion, stress level, even being outside, like we live in Florida, like we got sunburn one time and your blood sugar is like crazy. And I'm like, how do all of these things literally impact it? And I guess another like last fun fact. So when I was in pharmacy school, I did a rotation at an endo clinic. So I had experience working with a pump. Like, I kind of knew the basics of that, but I didn't really know a lot about Dexcom and all of that. So I guess that was another cool thing to learn, just that technology, which we've also learned that our dog is even more accurate than Dexcom, which is really cool. Our dog's doing a great job with alerting Ben's blood sugars, but
we'll bring him for another episode, and we can have Amelia come back and talk about the training process a little bit. I think that would be an interesting one.
But yeah, I think those are probably like the top. There's a lot of things I've learned, but those are, I think, a few off the surface.
And I think something to expand upon too would be, from what you just mentioned, again, and something that you briefly mentioned was like the emotional stress, the physical stress, and how that can spike your blood sugar so much when it's a really crazy time of year, or it's a crazy stressful trip, or, you know, right before our wedding, stuff like that, where things are very high stakes and seem crazy, and the effect that can have on blood sugars. But then I also think the next step would be, I don't know, how do you felt about when you would see me stressed and my blood sugar is 240, how I felt? Did you expect those kind of responses from me? Like when I literally want to curl in a ball and have nothing to do with anyone and I feel like trash, did you expect those types of responses having learned what you learned in school?
I guess I didn't know what to expect having learned it in school, because it's one thing to be told like in a textbook, in a lecture, like, you know, hey, this is what happens, like these are the symptoms of being high, or these are the symptoms of being low. But physically, I feel like until you see it, you just don't know. So it was kind of like a constant learning type process, because that's what healthcare is. You're like continually learning. So I'm seeing all these things, I'm like, I didn't know that this is how it was going to be. Like, obviously, you know, I feel like I've been supportive, and I try
You've
to
been
be
amazing.
I try to be as supportive as possible. And now, you know, I have a better idea for sure. Well, I would hope I have a better idea at 4.5 years in. It'd be a little scary, but you know, now I know. But back then I kind of just didn't know. So I was always like, hey, you know, I'm here to help if you need me to help, whatever. Like, you know, I'll go check in on him during the day, make sure he's got his water, make sure he's hydrated, that kind of thing. But I feel like I just didn't know what to expect at first. So I'm kind of like, oh, this is what it is, you know?
Well, and I tell people all the time, unless you have diabetes or you live with someone who has diabetes, you do not understand diabetes. And I feel like in your case, you had a better understanding than 97% of the population, given the training you went through. But then once we lived together, really when we started dating, but when we really started living together, you're thinking, whoa, this is way different than I anticipated, and hopefully not in a bad or overwhelming way.
Oh, definitely not. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's overwhelming at all. I think the novelty of how many decisions that adds to like a day, 'cause I don't know about you, but like I'm going out of the house like like, I'm trying to remember, like, my keys, my phone, like, all that stuff. Adding on, you know, your backup insulin, your meter, your low snacks, and I'm probably forgetting a bunch of things. Y'all can fill me in on that too, but just the additional number of decisions, like, that has to go into that is just why. I think that's one of the things that really I'm like, wow, that's wild. Somebody should add it up and see how many, like,
Someone
additional...
did. They've done it.
Really?
It's been studied. It's about 180 additional decisions per day.
Oh, man.
So broken down per hour, it's about 7.5 per hour. It is.
Seriously.
180 decisions per day. There was a stat that said if you did every single thing that you're supposed to do as a person with diabetes, like, you know, logging your blood sugars and checking your feed and, you know, all that stuff, which we should be all doing a lot of that stuff anyway, right? But if you did every single solitary thing, it would add about 2 to 3 hours of tasks every single day to your life. Like, that's like adding on a college course of 4 credits, but you don't get any credit for it. You don't get Dean's List. You don't get added to your GPA. You just get to do it or you suffer, in a really dramatic way of putting it. But no, I feel like it's been interesting also at the same time, like getting to be so open and explaining blood sugars. But when it comes to those lows, I mean, you've seen the gamut. You of course know the infamous cookie dough story. Would you like to share? Would you like me to tell the story?
I'll tell a cookie dough story.
Oh boy, all right.
So, as we all know, Ben loves sweets. It's, you know, one of his favorites.
This is like also 3 weeks into dating. I'm just gonna point this out.
This happened to us very early on, and we always went to the same cookie dough place. And I think what were you trying to do? Like, see if eliminating dairy changed?
I was doing my one little elimination of dairy just to see if it did anything for my blood sugars, because I have this hypothesis that people with diabetes and dairy don't get along very well, and I still have this hypothesis, but gratefully for me, I tolerate it fine. But during these 3 weeks, I had cut out all dairy, so we went to this cookie dough place, and I was having the vegan cookie dough, which meant that it wasn't the usual full of dairy cookie dough.
Exactly. So it was definitely, it had a way different texture, and of course, like, I was curious, so I tried it, and I remember trying it, and I'm like, wow, Ben, the texture of this one is way different. I'm like, this definitely has a lot more fat, because I could tell. I'm like, mine's like more, you know, textury, whatever. I'm like, his is a little looser, and it definitely had
it basically had it was, I think it had coconut oil or coconut flour as the base, and which is going to be more fat and fewer carbs. And for whatever reason, I didn't believe that it had fewer carbs in it, so I just dosed like normal cookie dough. And we weren't even, I think, at the car yet, or we had just gotten in the car, and I'm like, I feel weird.
Yeah, it was, I told him that, and that's kind of who I am as a person. I'm not a very outspoken person. Like, I'll stand up for myself and stuff, but I said that, and I wasn't really direct, because that's not the way that I am with your diabetes. Like, I wasn't gonna be like, hey Ben, this definitely tastes a lot different than the regular cookie dough.
These days you would be, but back then it's too early.
And we were very early on into dating, so when we were eating that, I'm like, hey, you know, like, this definitely tastes different. And mentally I'm like, hopefully by me saying that, he, you know, what he needs to do.
I was stubborn back then.
Definitely did not happen, but
I ate her cookie dough too.
Yeah, I was gonna say that he had to eat my regular cookie dough.
I got to 35, and it wasn't one of my proudest moments. And first of all, I would like to just mention, everybody screws up at some point, so don't be perfect and think you have to be perfect with your blood sugars. Yes, this was almost 4.5 years ago, but it happens to all of us. So I went super low. Did you freak out? Were you concerned? You're just like, hey, you're fine. You know what you're doing.
I mean, I knew he was definitely, it was a worse low, because he was starting to sweat and everything. And you don't usually sweat if you happen to drop to like the 60s or whatever, pop a couple candy corns and you're fine. You know, it's not like, oh my God, let me come run and grab all this stuff. That one I was like, oh, he definitely doesn't feel good. But at least we had the cookie dough there. I was like, well, I guess your dairy-free experiment's over.
Needless to say, I tested the dairy-free experiment the next day. I expedited the timeline a little bit. Instead of 4 weeks, I did the 3. And then, needless to say, it went well. I still eat dairy to this day, and it was fantastic. But in that situation, wasn't my shining moment, but you didn't fold under pressure. You didn't crack under pressure. You're just kind of like, hey, I've got some stuff if you need it. I'm here if you need me. We're good. But like, we had the glucagon discussion pretty early on in the relationship.
Oh, yeah. The glucagon. I think I pulled like every single one of your diabetes friends, because having that background in healthcare, I'm like, how could you not carry a glucagon pen? Like, wouldn't that be like the first thing that you would want? And I'm like, how do all these people not have one?
Well, I'm prefacing it. So I was carrying a glucagon. Again, this is 2019. And my glucagon, I think, had expired like 3 years before. And so Amelia's over here saying, your glucagon's expired. I'm like, at least I carry a glucagon. And she's like, what do you mean you carry a glucagon? Well, none of my friends do. So we're at the Children with Diabetes conference, and she just starts polling. She polled like 15 people about who carried a glucagon. And I was the only person that carried a glucagon. So if you're listening to this, watching this, however you're absorbing this wonderful story, I highly recommend having some form of glucagon, whether it's the one that's inhalable, whether it's an injectable, whether it's, the new one that came out. Have something on you. But it definitely was remarkable early on. And again, little idiosyncrasies that you don't necessarily know about diabetes, even if you're a healthcare provider, until you are in that world and fully immersed. Then now I feel like Amelia and I, like, we speak diabetes language to each other.
Yeah.
Like lows and highs. It doesn't seem like you're as thrown. I think you can tell at times when my number's high and I feel like trash. You can usually tell.
That's true. That's true.
Well, what do you mean by that's true?
Well, if I see you and you're kind of just like on the couch, you're like, hey, I didn't really get to this or that or whatever. And I'm like, well, whatever, I'll pick up, I'll, go at it and I'll do what I need to do to help out. But yeah, I mean, I don't like micromanage it by any stretch. I think the only time I ever reach out to you for Dexcom is like if I'm up earlier than you for work, because my work shifts are usually earlier than yours, then I'll reach out to you, or I'll like, if it's really bad, I'll be like, hey, you need to fix this. But if you're like floating right around 70, I'll be like, you're fine. If something happened overnight and you dropped to like 50 or your pump didn't turn it off or whatever, I'll be like, hey, you need to wake up. All right, I gotta call him 3 times so that it goes through the do not disturb or whatever it is.
Well, and so as we wrap up this one, give like a couple things. Like what would be to someone in a new relationship, maybe who doesn't have diabetes, but their partner does, or to someone who has diabetes and, their partner doesn't, what would be a couple words of wisdom that you would give them?
I think number one, just being open with each other like you would be in any relationship that, you wanted to succeed, whether, the person has diabetes or not. I think being open about the support, being open about what, might potentially happen and what the two of you, want from each other, because you may have diabetes and you may want that other person to be able to, be that second set of eyes for you. I could see that happening if somebody was maybe newer diagnosed or whatever, and just different people want different things. Like have that conversation early about, whether it's a hands-off or hands-on approach or whatever, they want. I think the other thing too, leave additional time if you're going somewhere, just in case something happens, or hey, maybe you need to stop or whatever. Definitely, I feel like I've started also like mentally making sure that you have low snacks and stuff with you, making sure that I squeeze every last minute and wait to leave until the last second. So definitely something that's benefited me, made me a better person, made me, start planning things earlier, planning a good timeline there. And then I guess the third thing would be, I feel like now I've even started like making sure that you have a low snack, or we're always good on that. I remember one time going to a different Publix in like January or February when they were out of candy corn normally, but like I found like 7 or 8 bags. I'm like, Ben, honey, I got you all this candy corn. And I was like very excited about it. So just making sure, I feel like that's another thing that I, make sure that you always have your low snacks. I think I actually put that in our vows too. I definitely put that in our vows. I think just overall, it really comes down to having an open conversation about it with, your significant other, like you would for all important topics that you talk about in a relationship that, you need to be on the same page for. So it's just another topic that you guys need to be on the same page for, is really kind of, I feel like, the key to success, and just being, being yourself. Because if you lie to make the other person, I don't want to say lie, but if you kind of say something and you're like, well, maybe, this isn't exactly how I want it, or, I'm going to try to just, beat around the bush because I'm not sure how the other person's going to think, then it's going to be a lot more difficult to grow and build on, because you don't have that foundation to grow and build on.
And that transparency is the backbone of any good relationship. And so I think those were some great points right there. And I think something that could be interesting, I want people to let us know, I think we should have an episode just about sex.
Oh, yeah.
I think we should talk about that, because that is an animal in and of itself from a blood sugar standpoint that people do not discuss, and people are almost afraid to discuss it, and not going to be like, oh yeah, we're going to go into all this explicit detail, but from a blood sugar standpoint, I think it would be huge. So not today, but a different episode. I think that would be a really good one to talk about and cover in major depth. But I wanted to, again, thank you for joining me on this podcast adventure. We'll also have one episode about Roscoe P's training, because you were the mastermind behind about 90% of that, I basically just showed up, which was amazing. So I think people will be very intrigued to find out how our little fella manages to sniff out my lows and my high blood sugar. So thank you again. We know you'll be a repeat guest. You won't have it. No, I'm just kidding. I was like, you live here, so you can pop in at any time. But thank you. I say thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening to this episode. Let us know what topics you want to hear about from a relationship standpoint. We are open books, clearly. So let us know and we'll make sure that we cover it. And we'll catch you in the next episode. Wishing you happy blood sugars today, tomorrow, and the rest of the week.